October 14, 1912, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The air is cold. The crowd is restless. The election is weeks away, and the atmosphere feels electric. Theodore Roosevelt is not supposed to be here. He had already been President of the United States. He had already shaped history. Most men would have retired in glory. But not Roosevelt. After a bitter split with his own Republican Party, he decided to run again, this time under a new banner, the Progressive Party. They called it the Bull Moose Party, and they called him the Bull Moose because he was strong. Because he was fearless. Because he refused to back down. That night, Roosevelt was preparing to give a speech at the Milwaukee Auditorium. He stood outside the Gilpatrick Hotel, waving to supporters, and then a man stepped forward. He raised a pistol and pulled the trigger. The sound cracked through the evening like lightning. The bullet struck Roosevelt in the chest. For a moment, everything froze. The crowd screamed. Women fainted. Men rushed forward. Roosevelt staggered backward, his glasses case shattered. The thick stack of folded speech papers in his pocket tore open. And then silence. People expected him to collapse. Instead, he reached into his coat. He pulled out the blood-stained pages of his speech. He touched his chest and calmly said, "I don't believe you fully understand that I have just been shot." The crowd was in chaos. Some men tackled the shooter to the ground. Others shouted for a doctor. Women cried. Supporters surrounded Roosevelt, trying to hold him up. Blood was slowly spreading across his white shirt, but Theodore Roosevelt was not panicking. He had been a hunter. He had been a soldier. He had been shot before, though never like this. He coughed lightly. He waited. He checked something very important. If the bullet had pierced his lung, he would be coughing blood. He was not. That meant one thing. The bullet was still inside him, but it had not hit the lung. He looked at the crowd, and then he made a decision that would define his legend forever. He refused to go to the hospital. Instead, he insisted on going to the auditorium. His advisors were horrified. "Sir, you've been shot?" "Yes," Roosevelt replied calmly, "but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." The crowd inside the auditorium had no idea what had happened outside. They were waiting for their candidate. Excited, nervous, hopeful. Then the doors opened, and there he was, not carried, not supported, walking, slowly, but standing. The audience erupted into applause. They didn't yet know. Roosevelt stepped to the podium. He raised his hand. Silence fell. "My friends," he began, his voice steady but lower than usual, "I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible." He paused, then he said the words that would echo through American history. "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot." Gasps filled the room. Some people screamed. Others thought it was a joke. It was not. He opened his coat, revealing the blood. "Real, dark, spreading, Doctors rushed forward. Roosevelt waved them away. "No," he said. "I will finish this speech, and for the next 90 minutes. He spoke, with a bullet lodged in his chest. He spoke about democracy. He spoke about justice. He spoke about corporate power and political reform. His voice weakened at times. He leaned on the podium, but he never stopped. Every sentence carried weight. Every word carried defiance. The crowd was no longer cheering. They were stunned. They were witnessing something beyond politics. They were witnessing willpower. When he finally finished, his final words were simple. "Now, gentlemen, I will ask you to excuse me. I do not know whether I can finish this speech, but I believe I have done enough." Only then, only after 90 minutes, did he allow himself to be taken to the hospital. When Theodore Roosevelt finally agreed to medical treatment, he was pale, but still conscious. Doctors rushed him to the hospital. The examination was tense. They needed to know one thing: how deep had the bullet gone? X-rays were not as advanced as they are today. Surgery was risky. Infection was deadly in 1912. After careful inspection, the doctors made a surprising decision. They would not remove the bullet. It had lodged near his ribs, missing his lung by a small margin. Trying to extract it could cause more damage than leaving it in place, so they stitched the wound, and the bullet remained inside his chest. For the rest of his life, Roosevelt recovered slowly, but something had changed. The physical wound healed, the legend did not. News of the shooting spread across the country within hours. Newspapers printed dramatic headlines. Illustrations showed Roosevelt standing tall, blood on his shirt, refusing to fall. Americans were stunned. Even his political enemies expressed admiration. It was no longer just about policy. It was about character, about courage, about endurance. But despite the heroic image, Roosevelt did not win the election. The presidency went to Woodrow Wilson. The Bull Moose Party fractured. The political gamble had failed. And yet, history remembered something else. Not the loss, not the numbers, but the moment. A man, shot in the chest. Choosing to stand, choosing to speak, choosing to finish what he started. Roosevelt once said, "Far better it is to dare mighty things than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much." On October 14, 1912, he lived those words. He could have left. He could have survived quietly. Instead, he turned pain into power. And that is why, more than a century later, we still tell this story, not because he was perfect, not because he always won, but because on that night in Milwaukee, America saw what unbreakable will looks like. The bullet stayed in his body, but the courage stayed in history. History often remembers victories, elections won, wars ended, laws signed, but sometimes history remembers something far more powerful, a decision. On October 14, 1912, Theodore Roosevelt made a decision. Not to retreat, not to collapse, not to let fear take control. He chose to stand, he chose to speak, he chose to finish what he started. In that moment, politics disappeared. There were no parties, no campaigns, no strategies. There was only a wounded man, and his will. The bullet did not make him brave, it revealed that he already was. Courage is not the absence of pain, it is action in spite of it. Roosevelt understood something most leaders never do. People don't follow perfection. They follow strength, not physical strength, moral strength, the strength to endure, the strength to remain steady when everything around you falls apart. He lost the election. He did not return to the White House, but he secured something far greater than political power. He secured immortality in the American story, because leadership is tested not in comfort, but in crisis. And that night in Milwaukee, with blood on his shirt and a bullet in his chest, Theodore Roosevelt passed that test. More than a century later, the story still inspires, not because it is dramatic, not because it is shocking, but because it asks a question. If you were in his place, would you have stayed? Would you have spoken? Would you have stood? That is why this moment matters. Because it reminds us that greatness is not about never falling, it is about refusing to stay down, and that is why the legend of the Bull Moose lives on.